All right, so let's look at computing with percents. Um, the biggest problem that I think most people run into with percents, especially with computing with percents, is knowing which operation to do, right? Am I multiplying? Am I dividing? When do I do which one? Okay. So what we want to do is just sort of review how to go through that. And what I want to do is show you a framework for how to set up, a problem. Okay. Um, so the key is going to be that when we say percent of, that means multiply. Okay. So if I take to give you an analogy, if I say I have 4 of something, right? That means I have 4 copies of that thing, right? So, if you could think of I have 4 identical copies, right? And that's kind of like what multiplication is, right? If I have 4 identical copies of 5, okay, then that's like 4 times 5 to see how much stuff I have. Okay. What we need to be very careful about is percents are fractions, and when I multiply fractions, I have to deal with the numerator and the denominator. Okay, and that can be kind of tricky. So a good way to avoid having any problem with percents is to typically just always convert it to a decimal before we do any math, okay? And specifically multiplication and division. Adding percents works just fine, right? Subtracting percents you don't have to worry about. But if you're going to do any multiplication or division, if you just convert to a decimal first, then you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so let's look at how we can go through an example here. So suppose my problem says, what is 40% of 65? The way that I'm going to go through this is I'm going to translate this sentence into math symbols. Okay, so what is an unknown? So I just put an unknown variable here, x. Okay. The math notation for is, right? If something is something, it's equal to that thing. Okay. 40% I write as a decimal, right? So I convert to a decimal, move left 2 places, so I get 0.4. Okay. Percent of means multiply. Okay. So when I have decimal numbers, I like to put them in parentheses for multiplying, because if I put like a dot, that can get confused if I'm sloppy, and it might look like a decimal point. Okay. And if I put like a little x or something like that, well, that gets confusing because I already have an x in my problem. Okay. And then I have my number 65. So then I just have a math equation, and I can see, okay, percent of means multiply. So I have 0.4 times 65. Okay. Or I can just look at this as an algebra equation, and I can solve it, right? And I can say, okay, my unknown is 0.4 times 65. I get out my calculator, and I just type that in. Okay. There's no bonus points for doing mental math. So, you get your 26, and you're very confident that that's the answer. So 40% of 65 is 26. Okay. So what is 7% of 51? I do the same thing. I convert it. What is my unknown is 7%. Percent of is multiply. So I'm just going to take 0.07 times 51, and I get 3.57. Okay. Now, you might look at this and be like, well, I just know it's multiply. Can I just do that instead of, converting over? Okay. Yeah, if you see percent of and you just want to multiply them straight away and not write out a math sentence, that's fine. What I'm trying to do, though, is give you a structure so that if you have a confusing problem, right, you know how to set it up in a way that will allow you to unconfuse it, right? Okay. So here's a little table of the, English and math translation that we just did. Okay. And again, I think that it's very helpful to have, a way to take something complicated and sort of break it down into pieces. Okay. That's a really useful skill, especially in a math class, because, people get confused, right? It's very easy to get confused. Okay. So, again, taking an example here where I want to convert this into a math sentence. What is, so I have my unknown x, okay, 38% I write as a decimal 0.38, percent of means multiply, and so I'm taking percentage of a number, so 0.38 times 61, okay, and we get 23.18. All right, so now I have some examples where maybe things get mixed up a little bit. What if I say 54 is what percentage of 60? Okay, now it can get confusing, like, wait a minute, that's not saying percent of, right? It's changed a little bit here, so we have to be careful. But if I do the translation, it becomes very clear how to solve this, right? So if I translate this over, right, I just have the number 54. Is equals, my what is my unknown, so I put an X. Okay. And then I want percent of means multiply, so times, and then I have my number 60. So here I can see 54 equals X times 60. As an algebra equation, that's very easy to solve, right? I say, oh, okay, I'm going to divide both sides by 60. That's how I solve this, okay? So if I take 54 divided by 60, I get 0.9, okay? So my unknown percentage is 0.9, right? So my answer is 0.9, or 90%. Okay. Okay, so again, that idea of translating, it creates an extra line of writing, but then it becomes very clear how to, what operation do I use, right? In this case, I was actually dividing the numbers, and it helps me know like which way to divide, right? Because again, percents don't always have to be a number between 0 and 1, so it's not always the bigger number on the bottom. Okay, so 32 is what percentage of 20? So again, I'm going to translate that over. 32, this is my equals, what percent? So I put my X here, and it's a percent of 20, so times 20. Okay, so then if I want to solve, we divide. Okay, so I'm going to take 32 divided by 20, and I get 1.6. Okay, or if I convert that back to a percent, because it said what percent, I want to write my answer as a percent, I move the decimal back to the right to convert to a percentage. So we get 160% as our answer. All right. Any questions so far? Okay, so what I want you to do is try this one. Try example 8 without me, and let's see what we get, and then I'll go through it. So I'm going to give you like a minute or two to try it out. All right, so let's go ahead and try this now. Suppose the rent on an apartment is $900 1 year, and the rent goes up by 5%. Find the new rent amount, right? So the rent increased by 5%, so I want to know how much it went up. So let's say, what I want to know is, what is 5% of 900, right? That's kind of like the first part of my question, okay? So we say, okay, well, I know how to do that, right? X equals 0.05 times 900. That's the translation work that we just did a minute ago. You say, okay, well, that's a very straightforward multiply. So 0.05 times 900 is 45. Okay. All right, since 900 was in dollars, right, this is $45. So that means the rent went up by $45. So when it says find the new rent amount, I start with $900, and it went up by $45. So my new rent amount is $945.